everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. This is actually my favorite monthly video I make for you guys because this is based on my own analysis of the National Association of Realtors monthly report regarding home prices, home sales, housing inventory, and of course, much, much more. So I have a lot to share in today's video. Let's go ahead and dive right in. This report was released last week on June 22nd. I took last week off to have a vacation with my family, so it's actually really good to be back here. So it says here, existing home sales marginally increased in May, according to the National Association of Realtors. Home sales were mixed among the four major U.S. regions, with the South and West posted increases or improvements, and the Northeast and Midwest experienced pullbacks on a month-over-month basis. However, though, for each of these four major regions, they posted a decrease compared to 1 year ago. Now, here's another way to look at this. This is on our Uncle Fred's website here, and of course, the source is the National Association of Realtors. So for May, on a seasonally adjusted annualized pace, there was 4.3 million, flat compared to April at more or less 4.3 million as well, but much lower than 1 year ago at 5.4 million. Also, here's a look at existing home sales going back to 2019. So right now, 4.3 million is a seasonally adjusted annualized basis here, flat compared to last month, but still up compared to the trough we saw in January this year at 4 million flat. But at 4.3 million, this is much lower than the over 6 million we saw back in early 2022, as well as 2021. As I always say, real estate is local, and you actually can see this in the stats right here. They look at the Northeast, the Midwest, the South, and the West regarding home sales in the US, of course. So at 4.3 million, this is only an increase of 0.2% that we saw from April, but a giant decrease of 20.4% from 12 months ago, when at that time there was 5.4 million home sales. So again, compared to 1 year ago, every single one of these major regions recorded decreases by more than 10%. The biggest decrease was actually in the Northeast, and then in the West down by about 25%, whereas the South only decreased by 16.5%. However, though, on a month-over-month basis, again, an increase of 0.2%, that was led by the West, a big increase of 2.6%, and also we saw a gain of 1.5% in the South. However, though, in the Northeast and the Midwest, they decreased in the range of 2 to 2.9%. Now, here's my own analysis regarding home sales in the United States, and then I'm going to be touching on home prices as well. So this right here, these two columns is what I pulled from the National Association of Realtors website here, and actually gave me permission to share this with you guys back in September last year. Everything else is based on my own analysis of their data here. So again, 4.3 million right now. That's a seasonally adjusted annualized rate of home sales. And this is based on contracts signed in March and April. So you get your offer accepted in March, for example, approximately 30 days later, the house is yours, depending on the market you guys are living in. So back in March and April, the average 30-year fixed rate was approximately 6.4%. This is pretty significantly lower than today's rates at 6.9%. 6.9% has been more or less the daily rate for about a week or so, according to the Mortgage News Daily. And I mention this because rates have been more or less increasing for the past month or so, I would imagine that the number of home sales is likely to decrease in the months ahead here. And also that would be due to a seasonality for housing market as well, when we tend to see an uptick in home sales in the first half of the year, and then it kind of weans off in the last half of the year. But again, though, keep in mind, these rates right here are seasonally adjusted though. So there's a few more things I want to touch on regarding home sales here, because at 4.3 million, this is approximately a 7.5% increase from the trough we saw in January this year, when the trough or the number of home sales was at 4 million. Also flat compared to 1 month ago. And also when looking at pre-pandemic levels, at 4.3 million, This is the lowest levels since July of 2011. On top of that, when looking at post-COVID levels, going back to May 2020, this is actually the 5th lowest rate we've seen so far since then. And one more thing I do want to mention is that this 20.4% decrease compared to May of 2022 is actually the 21st consecutive month in which home sales were down year over year. So in other words, nearly 2 years in which home sales have decreased compared to 1 year ago. Okay, let's talk about home prices according to the National Association of Realtors. And in this press release, they only mention 2 sentences regarding home prices, which is pretty eye-opening because I have a lot more to share regarding trends we've seen this year, especially compared to the previous 13 years, going back to 2010. So here's what they had to say. The median existing home sold price, these are based on closed home sales for existing houses only, excluding brand new home construction. So the median home sold price for all housing types in May was $396,100, a decrease of 3.1% from May of 2022, when at that time it was around $409,000. Prices grew in the Northeast and the Midwest, but fell in the South and also the West. And here's another way to look at this. So again, prices have decreased by 3.1% from 1 year ago. But of course, every real estate market is different, right? We saw gains in the Northeast and the Midwest, especially the Northeast, increasing by 2.5%, whereas the West decreased by 5.7%, and also the South decreased by 2.7%. So in other words, of course, this 3.1% year-over-year decrease nationwide is led by the South, and of course, especially the West, down by 5.7%. On a national level, here's a look at our good Uncle Fred's website here regarding prices. So again, right now at $396,100, down from the trough we saw this January at $361,200. I think it's around a 10% increase year to date. So prices have increased by about 10% ever since the lows we saw back in January this year. But also at $396,000, this is still much lower than the all-time record high of $413,800 that we saw last June. But again, even though we're down on a year-over-year basis and also compared to the record highs back in June last year, prices have been increasing every single month this year. And here's another way to look at this. Here's my own analysis of the Realtors data here. Here's what they have on their website. Everything else is based on my own analysis here, and also my nerdy Excel formulas right here. So at $396,100, this is actually the highest levels since July last year, when at that time the median sold price was $399,200. And also, up by 10% since January, which was a trough at $361,200. So here's what the Realtors Association did not mention, though, is that prices have increased by 2.6% on a month-over-month basis. Yes, it's entirely normal to see increases in prices in May compared to April, of course. That's our seasonal uptick in our housing market each and every year. But also, prices have been increasing for 4 consecutive months as well. So one thing I do want to mention is that even though home sold prices have increased by about 2.6% from April, again, that's a seasonal uptick in our housing market, it's still actually below the average going back to 2010. Because based on my own analysis right here, the average month-over-month change, this is the average change from April to May each and every year going back to 2010, is an increase of 3.4%, whereas this year it only increased by 2.6%. So even though this 2.6% increase is lower than the average going back to 2010, here's something you guys should be aware of that the Realtors Association did not mention here. So look at the price decreases we saw last year. This was last year's correction we saw from July through the end of the year, more or less. So for the price changes from June last year to the trough we saw back in January this year, we saw a decrease of 12.7% in the median sold price in the US, a decrease of nearly 13%. That was last year's correction in our US housing market. So even though prices have decreased by 12.7% from June last year to January this year, they still have increased by 9.7% ever since then. That's because they increased from $361,000 to now nearly $400,000. So because prices have increased by nearly 10% from January this year, the decrease we saw from the all-time record high last year is only 4.3% now, going from $414,000 now to $396,000. So interesting to see here that the changes we saw from the all-time record highs last year to the trough was a decrease of 13%, but because prices have increased by nearly 10% so far this year, the decrease from last year's highs, or the all-time record high, is now only 4.3%. But wait, there's more. I want to share how these changes on a year-over-year basis also compares to the average going back to 2010 as well. Let's first talk about this year-over-year change in prices down by 3.1%. So when looking at the trends going back to the early 2000s, this 3.1% decrease on a year-over-year basis is actually the biggest year-over-year drop in 11 and a half years. And this goes back to December of 2011. So back in December 2011, which is right there. So back in December 2011 compared to December 2010, the median sold price decreased by 3.9%. Whereas this year, it decreased by 3.1%. Also, as a note here, this is actually the fourth month in a row in which home sold prices have decreased compared to 12 months ago after 11 years of increases. So this is really telling us a tale of two different markets, really, or two different ways to look at our housing market. So when looking at year-over-year changes at 3.1%, the biggest decrease going back to December 2011. However, though, prices have still increased for 4 consecutive months. I mentioned that because when only looking at year-over-year changes, it really tells an entirely different story when looking at month-over-month changes, though, because the peak from trough, again, down by 12.7%, but prices have increased year-to-date by nearly 10%. There's a few more metrics I do want to touch on regarding prices here because the change from the all-time record highs, again from June last year at $414,000, now it's at $396,000, again, a decrease of 4.3%. That's June to May. So I actually want to look at the average change from June to May each and every year going back to 2010. And the average was a gain of 2.9%, whereas this year it was a decrease of 4.3%. So obviously the change from June last year is much worse than the average going back to 2010, a gain of 2.9%. Also, this 4.3% decrease from June to May this year is the biggest June to May decrease going back to 2011, when at that time it was a decrease of 7.4%. And lastly, a lot of you guys ask about what are the home price changes compared to 2 years ago as well as 3 years ago. So compared to 2 years ago, the median sold price has increased by 12%. Also compared to 3 years ago, this is really the increase in prices post-COVID, going back to May of 2020. So home prices have increased by 40% ever since May of 2020. Okay, let's change gears slightly here and talk about housing inventory, the number of houses for sale according to the National Association of Realtors. So for May, they have reported there was 1,080,000 houses for sale. I believe they actually include some pending home sales in the inventory numbers because according to Realtor.com, as well as AltosResearch.com, there's around 500,000 houses for sale right now, or at least for the end of May. but according to the National Association of Realtors here, it's actually just under 1.1 million. And that's an increase of nearly 4% from April, but still down by 6.1% from 12 months ago. Also at 1,080,000, this is the highest levels going back to November last year at 1.12 million. Here's another way to look at this according to our good Uncle Fred's website here. So inventory levels have been increasing for 2 consecutive months according to the National Association of Realtors. However, having said that, it still has been more or less on a downward trend ever since the second half of last year. And also at nearly 1.1 million, this is much lower than the 1.3 million we saw back in July last year, and also 1 year ago at 1.15 million. So that's housing inventory. Let's have a look at the month supply, because according to the National Association of Realtors, the month supply is at 3.0 months, up from the 2.6 months we saw from March, but up greatly from 1 year ago when the month supply was only 2.6 months. Also, according to Lawrence Yoon, who's the National Association of Realtors chief economist, he stated the following: available inventory, in other words, the amount of houses for sale, strongly impacts home sales as well. That's entirely true. He says newly constructed houses are selling at a pace reminiscent of pre-pandemic times because of abundance of inventory in that sector. And that's entirely true as well, because for existing houses, we have a lack of houses for sale, historically speaking. However, for new home construction, or for new houses actually for sale, they have a big supply of houses for sale here. So let me just kind of corroborate his statement here with data. Go figure. So here's a look at the number of single-family houses for sale that is brand new construction here. So for the month of April, the most recent stats we should have new home sales this week, very, very soon here. So for April, on a seasonally adjusted annualized basis, 683,000, roughly on par with pre-pandemic levels in the range of 700,000 to approximately 720,000. And again, a friendly reminder, this is based on contracts being signed between builders and buyers and not closed home sales. That's how the U.S. Census Bureau measures new home sales, which is really acting like a pending home sale than anything else. So again, new home sales or contracts being signed for brand new home construction is roughly on par with pre-COVID levels. And this is because of this giant amount of supply of new home construction houses for sale for single family. So for April, there's 433,000, and that's seasonally adjusted, but not annualized. So 433,000, the highest pre-pandemic levels going back to approximately June 2008, when at that time there was 435,000. In any case, getting back to this report here, it says, however, existing home sales is down sizably due to the current supply being roughly half the level of 2019. So night and day difference between new home construction houses for sale versus existing houses for sale. So right now we have approximately half as much houses for sale for existing inventory compared to 2019, which again, compared to new home construction, entirely different story here. 433,000 for sale, but back in 2019, this time, April 2019, there was only 334,000. So one thing I do want to mention regarding his quote here saying we have a lack of home sales due to the fact we have a lack of houses for sale is also one reason why we're seeing a low amount of home sales is of course because of elevated mortgage rates, of course, as well, right? So as of today, which is June 26, according to the Mortgage News Daily, average 30-year fix is at 6.91%, FHA is at 6.62%, and VA is at 6.61%. So compared to 1 year ago, rates 1 year ago were at 5.85% for an average 30-year fix, for people with great credit, of course, right? And that's an increase of more than 1 percentage point, an increase of 1.06 percentage points compared to 12 months ago. So again, to briefly recap here, we're seeing a lack of home sales because limited inventory, but also because we have elevated rates as well. Now, here's some more metrics I do want to share with you guys because a lot of you guys ask, what is the percentage of investor sales as well as first-time home buyers, for example? Excuse me. So for first-time home buyers, by the way, these dark blue lines is this May. The light blue bars is 1 year ago, back in May 2022. So for first-time home buyers, approximately out of all the houses that sold this May, 28% came from a first-time home buyer. 1 year ago, it was 27%. Also, sales to investors was 15%. It was 16% 1 year ago. Also, cash sales were equal at about 25% of all home sales this May. So nearly one, or actually not nearly, so one every 4 closed home sales this May went to an all-cash buyer. Distressed home sales are still very, very low at 2%. 1 year ago, it was 1%. And also days in the market has increased slightly compared to May 2022 because days in the market is at 18 days. This is a measure of when a house gets listed for sale until when the home seller accepts an offer from a home buyer. That's 18 days this May. 1 year ago, it was 16 days. So one thing I do want to mention, and before I wrap this video up, is this right here. This is the percent change in home sales this May compared to May 2022 by price range. Something I found to be very interesting is that the biggest decrease in the number of closed home sales this May was for luxury home sales. I would say that obviously it depends on the market, right? So, a $1 million home sale in the Bay Area is a fixer, whereas in the Midwest, for example, it would be a luxury home price, right? But anyways, for home prices that sold for over $1 million, that was a decrease of 22.3%. The biggest decrease in each of these price segments. That was followed by home sales in the range of $750,000 to $1 million, down by 21.3%. In contrast, for home sales in the range of $100,000 to $500,000, that was a decrease of less than 20%. And with that said, please comment below with your biggest takeaways from today's video. Also, if you guys got any value out of this video whatsoever, then please hit the like button. I greatly appreciate that. Can't talk. Hope you guys have an awesome day and look forward to seeing you on the next video.